This video is an introduction to our Conflicts of Interest course. It gives you basic working definition of a conflict of interest, as well as introducing you to some of the scenarios that we will cover in other videos. A conflict of interest is a circumstance or set of circumstances where some or all of the interests of people to whom the company or its representatives provide services are inconsistent with or diverge from some or all of the interests of the company or its representatives. This includes actual, apparent, and potential conflicts of interest. A conflict of interest may arise in the discharge of a director's or employee's functions or duties, including provision of credit, giving financial advice, decision-making, handling complaints, applying policy or procedures, reporting, supervising staff and dealing with customers. Conflicts of interest can be financial or personal, can relate to any business conducted by a company, and can involve the interests of a director or employee or members of the director or employee's family. Directors and employees must not take into account personal interests or any other considerations not relevant to the best interests of customers. A lack of impartiality may arise as a result of a family relationship or close friendship, whether or not financial loss or gain is involved. A company director is obliged to exercise their powers and discharge their duties in good faith in the best interests of the company and for a proper purpose. They must also not use their position or company information to gain an advantage for themselves or someone else or cause detriment to the company. In a company, there is a risk that the interests of a related party may influence the decision-making of directors to the detriment of the interests of members of the company as a whole when a company is considering whether or not to enter into a transaction with a related party. Together with the provisions about directors' duties, the Corporations Act imposes a number of protections to help manage this risk, including Section 195, which excludes directors of public companies with material personal interests in certain matters from attending director meetings about or voting on these matters unless approved by non-interested directors, and Chapter 2E, which requires public companies to obtain member approval to provide a financial benefit to a related party, subject to certain exemptions, such as where the benefit is given on arm's length terms. It is important that your company has clear policies and procedures with respect to managing conflicts of interest. There are always going to be grey areas. For example, there could be a conflict between the company's long-term sustainability goals and short-term decisions which will improve remuneration and profits, but not necessarily be in the company's interests in the long term. Financial services and credit regulation contain specific provisions requiring financial advisors and mortgage brokers to act in the best interests of their customers. There are separate obligations in respect of each area, and I will talk about these in further videos. In the case of financial services licensees, their licence requires them to have adequate arrangements for the management of conflicts of interest. For example, where a financial advisor receives an incentive from a product issuer and doesn't disclose that incentive to the client, they will be in conflict and may be in breach of their licence and the specific provisions of the Corporations Act. For credit licensees, the obligation is to have adequate arrangements to ensure that customers are not disadvantaged by conflicts of interest. Now, these provisions could relate to commissions received and whether or not those commissions are upfront or relate to volume. But these are issues that mortgage broker needs to manage, and I'll discuss these later. So whether you're a company director or a financial advisor or a mortgage broker, your obligation is to principally identify and control your conflict. You have to understand when there is a potential conflict or an actual conflict and understand whether that means that you not only have to disclose the conflict to your customer or to your company board, but whether or not that conflict can be managed or avoided in some way so that the customer or the company is not adversely affected. In some cases, you will not be able to participate in company decisions. In other cases, you may not be able to act for a client because you cannot sufficiently manage a conflict. And I'll discuss these in the other videos. So when you're ready, move on to the next video for a discussion in detail of the relevant topic.